Alright guys, so I'm back. So now basically in this video I want to basically set up the UI for all the different components as well as the app component, which is what the home page, every single component will be inside this app component. And so inside of our index.html you can see app root. This is similar to like the root div if you're using React. Basically this is basically where everything would be in. And so inside of the styles.css you can add global styles here. I just want to just add some. This is the only CSS I won't be copying from my previous project. When I made this, and this will just simply be the margin of reset to 0, as well as the padding. And then I just simply, to give it that gold color, I just want to do body, and I just want to set that to background color of golden. I think I did gold. I either did gold or goldenrod. I think I did just gold. And so basically now, let me see. Yeah, so inside of the app component, you can see they give us all this stuff here. And actually, we can do, make sure you're in your client folder. The thing is, when you save any file inside of the client folder, it'll automatically recompile Angular as long as there's no errors and it crashes. If it crashes, you have to restart it manually. But you can see here, we get a gold. Hi guys, it's Jamal again, and basically in this video I want to basically set up the UI, and so to set up the CSS and HTML for all the components. And so first we want to go to app HTML here, which is outside of components but still in the app folder. You can see here we get this again, and this was what we got previously when we ran the application using ngserve. And so I just want to get rid of this. And I just want to simply now for your HTML files, every HTML file has to be wrapped inside of a single element or it won't work properly. And so you want, basically it doesn't have to be a div, but you can do whatever, use whatever you want there. And inside of here we want to bring in something called the router outlet. So we'll do router outlet, and this is so that we can basically render the components that we have paths for in our app routing module here, basically inside of the app component. And so if you have more routes, you can basically render them all from router outlet. And so that's basically all we want to put inside of app HTML here. And basically for the CSS, let me check to see if I had any. No, I don't have any CSS there. And so basically the actual file for the TS file, so let me just talk about this really quickly. Now this here is basically where all the code is done. Any variables you create will be created here, and then they can be linked in an HTML simply by just stating the variable name. And I'll show you the different ng directives and stuff like that, or at least some of them, which is the ones I'll be using for this project. And it just is really useful how Angular is set up. So I guess we'll start with the about page. And so let me just do the about page CSS and HTML, which I have here. Oops, where is it at? Here it is. So the about HTML. Let me just grab this, and I'll go through like what this means and stuff in a second here. And we go to the about component. You can see every component initially inside of the HTML file will just say whatever the component name is and works like that. So we can just change this. And so basically what this is we have an emitter, which I'll talk about, and that's the name of the emitter, which we get from the Navbar. We call a function which takes the data from the emitter, which we have to pass an event in order to grab that data. And in that function name, we call inside of the about component. This is a variable which we bind it to the app navbar component as a prop if you're familiar with React, and we named it user logged in, which is the variable name inside of the about ts file, which I'll show you in a minute. Same with ID, we passed in the variable from the about component of app user ID and set it to and named it ID for the app navbar. And we did the same thing for the token. ng class, basically you have to basically what I usually do for that is instead of just putting the quotations right away, it's easier to type it by just doing the regular curly braces. You want to put the name of the CSS class in single quotes, and then you want to use Boolean true. You want to set it to true to show it. You can also do for ng classes, you can actually put a method in, a function in here, and you can actually return a class depending on if certain things are true or not. Now I didn't do that for this app, but you can basically use dynamic UI rendering by doing that, where you can change the classes of different things depending on whether something is showing or not. You can use string interpolation by doing double quotations if you want to output a variable into like the HTML, similar to single quotations in JavaScript and JSX, which is React React components and stuff. So basically, we just simply have this, and I can bring in the CSS as well. Call the component via its selector name. So you can see here every selector name starts with app dash and then whatever you named it. So app dash footer. So you want to make sure all your components have unique names so that they don't overlap or anything. And basically I just want to bring in app footer like that. And basically this will render it. And now what I want to do though is I basically want to pass in a class similar to what we have here. So I'll just do I'll do an ng class, and then I'll do here, and then I just set it to true, and then I just want to just take this whole thing and put it in quotations so that it can read it. And so basically inside of the CSS file here, that's where you would actually put the class, which I have here. And so if you put it home, and then basically this position is fixed, left 0 and bottom 0, meaning it's to the left and bottom, and basically a width of 100%, so it goes all the way across. And then the rest of the styling for the footer is actually inside of the footer component itself, but I didn't bring that in just yet. We'll get to that in a second. And so basically, that's all I wanted to put in there for that, the CSS. And then like if we put the footer here now, it's below the router outlet. So now because we put it there, we don't have to actually pass it into any of the components. And so I'm actually, because when I made this, that's what I did earlier. But I'm going to get rid of this now. We actually don't need to do that. Because you just put it in one place instead of having to put it in multiple places. And then let me grab the rest of the CSS for the about page. So we don't need the footer. We do want this. Go to CSS. And so basically background color with, I already explained the header and then the body and everything like that. Justify self of center, which basically just, that's like left and right. Text align to center for any text on the inside. And so basically that should handle that. And so we can do the about ts file, I guess. Close this. We want to bring in one thing really quick so we can do the import statement. And we want to bring this in from the router because when we're passing values into the router, like I showed you, where is it at here? We're passing these parameters in to the about page of the dashboard. You can also use local storage and you don't have to pass these in between each route. But because I kind of did it that way in the app already, that's the way I was going to just do it here. And basically what you want to do, bring in the router. And then whenever you bring in anything or you import anything, you want to pass it into the constructor with the keyword of private equal to activated route. And then we want to bring in the router as well, which will be used to actually navigate to a certain path that we put in there. And basically, we have ng on init, which basically fires. It's like a lifecycle method, like component did mount. So basically, it fires when a component is actually rendered on the browser. on the screen. And basically this fires once and it doesn't fire again unless the opponent is not rendered anymore, and then it's rendered again. Now if you have any inputs changing, which I'll show you in a minute, I guess I'll show you that later because I don't want to confuse you. But basically, you use ng on changes, and that will basically change whenever a component input is changed, which is like a prop in React. You use the annotation of input, which will basically Angular recognize it as an input. And so you see there with TypeScript, we're not using JavaScript, TS and not JS, so you can use TypeScript to define the type for each thing, including methods of what they should return. So this is void, so it doesn't return anything. And so we just want to do if, and then we want to use the route, so we can this.route, and then snapshot. Then if you just type in the name and hit enter, it'll automatically put this in front of it for you. And then we want to use paramap. Now this will probably be the longest line in this app, because basically it's like this is the what you have to do in order to get the parameters from the router. It's something called paramap. Basically, the route that you brought in is the activated route, which is the route that we came from. The snapshot of the data, so like an instance of the data or whatever data was there, a snapshot of it. And then this paramap, basically, param map, basically to get the params. So it's almost like rec.params, but they call it param map. And then .get for whatever specific parameter we want, like the ID or the token. And so basically, I just checked if the length is less than 2. This basically see if there's like any data or not in the ID field. And then if it is, I just wanted to set user logged in, which I didn't create yet. Let me create that. So user logged in, and then it's a of type Boolean. And initially it's going to be equal to false, or you can just leave it like that and it'll automatically be false. And so if this means that if the ID is not there, that means they're not logged in. So basically, we want to say user logged in, and you want to set it equal to false. The reason why I'm doing this is because if this component is rendered, and for instance, we have a logout thing, like a hamburger menu, and we log out while on the about page, you want to basically be able to check that if it re-renders and refreshes. And so basically, we can do else, and we can do user logged in to true, because that means that the data is there. And I didn't bring in the app user ID. I didn't set that yet. And this is a type string. We can set that to a default of empty. So it's similar to JavaScript, but just you have to define your type. And so basically, user logged in to true, and then we want to set the app user ID equal to, once again, the route snapshot, and then param map. Snapshot param map get, and then we just want to just get the ID again. And then we want to do the same thing. We want to set the token to the token parameter that we also had. I didn't bring in the token, did I? Oh, I did. Okay. And so we set that to the token. That's it for ng and init. So basically, this happens whenever this about component is rendered, or basically whenever they click about in the Navbar. And so now we want to simply just bring in one more function here. And we just want to do check status. And this is basically we can name it whatever we want. And this basically is just used to check if the value is equal to true for clearing out everything in the navbar if they hit logged out. And basically this will just set everything to false or empty. So app user ID like that, and then a token. And now I'm gonna just put a comment here first. This function clears everything if the user clicks log out in the Navbar. And so basically, we also want to redirect if they did log out, so we can redirect to the home page. I forgot all about HTE. Okay, so basically, let me do that again. Just to do HTE hire me in the future. So we want to redirect, so we can redirect to the home page. Basically, we just want to just call in the router, which we brought in here from Angular router with the activated route. And we want to basically do .navigate. And then we just want to pass in an array because we can pass in more than just the route. We can do pass in other things as well, but we just want the path in this case, and we just want to use slash to navigate basically to the home route. The only time you don't want to use slash is when you're in the routing module. But everywhere else, it's normal to use slash because that's the home route. And so basically, that's everything that we want to do for this component. And so when we go back here, you can see we get the logout status, which is why we call that check status method. And that logout status comes from the navbar. And so we check it. I also could have put the navbar outside, like above the router outlet in the app component, but I already did it where I passed it in as well because I was kind of making this in a hurry and I wasn't really thinking. So basically, that's why I was going to do it that way here. And basically, it shows you how to pass in data a little bit more because it's a little more harder of a way to do it. So I guess you can say you learned a little bit more from it. So basically, let me see. Pass in. Yeah, I took out the footer. Okay, so we're done with the about component. And so now let's do. I want to get into the off component, the home component, and the navbar component. Well, I'm gonna do the navbar now. But I want to get into the off component, the home component, and the post grid and post item components in the next video because it kind of doesn't make sense to kind of just mix those in there like that because that's not a natural way of making it. So I want to just naturally do all the basically the dummy components or the ones that just output data pretty much. And so we did the about page. Now we want to do the footer. So I'll bring that in. And the footer pretty much is just like a class of footer or a tag of footer. And then basically just a couple classes. Let me go back to the footer component. Like that. And so basically it's just a footer and then a paragraph that just says that this basically is the copyright symbol. There's also other useful symbols you can do like and M dash to give you a dash symbol. You can see dot. There's a ton of them. Another common one is and times, which gives you an X, which you can use for like a delete button. And so basically it's just a copy symbol and I just put my name there, something short. And then basically let me grab the CSS. So just the footer width, background in purple, height 15% of the screen, 100% for the width. On the text, put it in the middle, margin left of about 1.8 rem, and then just align it at the center, which is up and down. And so basically, I'm just gonna put that. Let's see, put that here. And so now we're basically done with the footer component. Let me see. Let me do the home page because that's another dummy component. And so I just want to let me grab that. And this is my first time actually teaching a project like this. So I'll, like, please leave comments just to let me know how I did and what I can improve on because I definitely know there's a lot for me to improve on when it comes to teaching. Because I'm not used to teaching or talking this much at all. So, but basically, we bring this in, and so we bind this here to the navbar and we call it logged in, and that's the user logged in, which is a variable inside of the home page component. Let me see what else. And then we give it obviously a class of home page, and there was some text. Let me just grab the CSS. Is there a way on YouTube to mark? I might mark certain points so after I like put all the CSS in there, I can basically mark each part where I do it so people can like skip ahead while I'm putting it in here, just to save people time. Let's see. Let me see. Do I have any? I don't think. Well, obviously, I know I have to put the variables in there for that one, but I have to check the other one too. Okay. And so basically, I just made a few variables for this one. We can close this now. And inside of the TS file here, I just simply want to bring in a couple variables. So it'll be app user ID again. It'll be a string set to empty by default. Token, same thing. So basically, and then the user logged in value, which is a boolean, same as the about page, and it'll be set to false. And basically, that's all we do for this one. Because if they're on this page, that means they're not logged in. They should only be on this page if they're not logged in instead of the dashboard. That's how I have it set up. And so I can do the loading component really quickly. Let me grab that. And then loading HTML. And so basically, just like ng class, you can do ng style, but both the field and the value have to be in quotations. And I use hexadecimal here simply because I'm sure if it would just pick it up here as like if I put the word red. I never really tried it. Text align of center, width of 100% for the actual like container of the H1, and then just loading with ellipses right there. And so now basically I'm gonna bring in I didn't have any CSS for this. I did the ng style. And so that's it for this component here. Let me see what's next. I want to do the navbar in this one as well. The navbar will be the most complex one. We also want to put something inside of the TS file for loading, and that's just simply a boolean of is loading. And it's set to boolean, and it'll basically be set to false by default. And then in here we want now we're bringing in the input as well whenever we use this. And that input is called loading data. That's what I named it. And so you want to use the @ symbol for any annotation. And this is input. And if you hit enter, it'll auto import it for you from Angular Core. We just want to set it equal to like just any variable loading data. And then it's a boolean like that. And basically, wait, what? Oh wait, you also want to put the parentheses there as well. There we go. And so basically we want to, instead of ng on init, what I was talking about earlier of on changes, we want to bring that in because the input can change. So whenever inputs are changing, you want to use on changes, just like if any props are changing, you want to use component did update and react. And so you want to basically switch this out on changes like that and implement it here. And then instead of ng on init, you want to use ng on changes, and the error goes away. It's also a void method, but inside of here, we want to take a variable, and you can call it anything. I usually call it changes. And then basically, you want to bring in simple changes like that. And that basically is also imported from the core. And what that does is it allows you to use the current value, the previous value, if it's the first change or not, which returns a boolean. So there's many different things you can do. And you basically want to call it like an associative array because it's almost like a JSON object. So you don't want to use like an object literal like you would use something dot name. Like you actually would have to call it like this. And so basically, whenever we're calling a change, I'll show you now. So basically the variable here is loading, which is connected to this HTML here, is loading. Oh, I forgot that there's an ngIf directive here. So basically this ngIf directive, you use the star and then ngIf. And what that does is basically it'll show this component if this variable is true. So instead of doing something like using the DOM model or like using document dot query by selector or whatever, grabbing this particular ID of something and then changing the dot attribute and setting visible or setting like visibility to hidden or something like that, or display of none or something like that, you simply can use this directive here and ngIf, and then like if the variable is loading, you can also set something else, and I'll show you later with that, where you can use an ng template, and I'll show you that as well. But basically, directives are very useful. And so basically in here we want to use changes, and then whatever the input name is, so loading data, and then we can do that current value, and you can see first change is first change, previous value, we want current value, and then basically that'll set it to true, and that's all we want to do here. And so now I just want to go back to the home page, no, not the home page, the navbar, and I want to put in the navbar really quick. And that'll be it for this video. So the navbar has a lot. I'm going to explain this. Let me put that in here. I guess I need to bring the CSS in and explain it as well. Just bring the CSS. There's a lot of CSS for this one. You can also use Bootstrap. So basically, we have a display of flex for the navbar, and that just sets everything in a line. So it won't go like underneath each other, it'll go side by side. Background color of purple, width of 100 to span across the screen, a height of 20%, padding of 10 pixels. You can also use rem there, or em, or view heights. You can use any unit you want. And then align content to center, which is up and down. This is the container for the links, width of 80%, so basically the entire thing. Up and down of 0 for margin, left and right of auto. Padding of 0 up and down, left and right 0.8 rem. And then basically display of flex as well, because that's where the actual links are. Display of flex for this one is so that we can put the button that we have, and we can put that there as well, instead of just like just the links. But the display of flex for the links is so that we can have the links side by side. Nav item is basically each link with some margin. The nav link is the link, and then we have text decoration of none. Then when we hover over it, you can see there it changes, and we have a cursor or pointer. And then basically you put that cursor or pointer on the nav link as well. You don't have to put it on the hover. Nav link divider, and then basically the logout button here, cursor or pointer, width of 5%, height of 3%. You can experiment with that if you want. Justify self of end. And then basically just margin right, background color aqua, border aqua, color white. You can use a border of none as well. You don't need to. And then basically that's it for this. And basically in here we have one component, it's a nav component, mg class of navbar, which is this one here, and that's the overall component. And then inside of there, that's the navbar link container, which is that div which starts here and ends here. You can also do comments. So I guess I can do a comment saying, oops. And I can do this is the link. This is the container for the links. And then right down here, I can do, this is the, I capitalize it up there. So this is the log out / login button. And so basically this button here, we use another ngIf directive. First let me do the links. So the links, we have more classes. That's the class for the navbar link containers. So you can see there it contains all the divs with the links. That's a nav item, which just gives some margin, then the actual link. So instead of using href like this, we actually have to use router link. And basically the reason why I put the brackets around it is because we're binding the values of these parameters that we set inside of the routing module here of ID and token. We're basically binding that to the router link. And basically we're also passing in the path that we want it to go to when clicked. And so that's why that's like that. And then we gave it a class there for styling, and then the word about. Same for home and dashboard. This actual home component, we have a GF directive of user status, which I actually, let me open up the TS file here. And I'm going to start putting that in there to explain it. So let me actually start putting this in. So there's a little bit more stuff here that we need to bring in. So first, let's bring in the router. You don't have to put spaces there, but I just did it so it looks a little bit cleaner. I usually don't put spaces there, but I'm just doing that because just so it looks neater on the screen. So basically, we want to import the router, and we want to pass it in here. And so basically, we want to bring in a bunch of inputs now. And so those inputs is what I explained earlier with the ID, the token, the logged in status of it. And so that's basically what the inputs will be. And so here we want to use that input, and it auto imports it for us. So basically we'll do logged in, and let's type boolean. We want another one, and that's going to be the user. I just called it ID, and that's a type string. Input user token. Now you can name them the same thing, but I named it different to make for it to it can be understood a little bit better. And so now we want to set the variables here, and so this will be user status of type boolean, app user ID, and then token. And actually, another good way to learn things is if you understand like some of the Angular syntax, or you understand conceptually what I'm doing. Try to predict what I'm like, how I'm going to do it before I do it, or try to do it yourself first and then see if I did the same thing. And that basically you'll learn a little bit faster that way. That's something I wish I knew when I was learning this stuff a little bit, but yeah, you'll learn a little bit faster that way, and it's a nice way to do it if you can, or you can just follow along. And so basically, let me see. So we want to change this to ng on changes because these inputs obviously can change, and that'll change the navbar to either the login or log out button depending on if they're logged in or not. And so we want to basically do change this to on changes, ng on changes. Oh wait, let me breathe in. And basically we want to pass in the changes again. And we just simply want to do if the ID it didn't show up. There we go. If the ID is not equal to undefined, because if you don't do this, you'll get an error saying that it couldn't read undefined. And then if changes inside of that, and then we want to call it using the associative array syntax. Dot current value is basically not equal to empty string, meaning that it's the user's logged in. And then we wanted to say user status of true because they're logged in. And we also want to do app user ID. We want to set that to changes, and then the input ID dot current value. Then we also want to set the token changes user token, because this is what we're going to be using to pass in when we navigate between routes. And so that's why it has to be there like that. And so basically, if they're not logged in, meaning it's equal to an empty string, oops, we'll do an else. And then this is where we'll just use user status set equal to false. And because I already set these default to empty string, I don't have to set them again. And I think earlier I actually did that with something else where I said that you didn't have to set it there either. I think it was in the about component where I set the user logged in to false. You don't have to do that by default. It's false. But anyways, and then we basically want to do another else here if they're undefined, meaning that they didn't pass it in because they went to this route. Basically like it is the params aren't there, and so basically we want to set it to false there as well to handle all the different cases. And so now, if we go back here, you can see we have a logout method with another ngif directive of user status. Now here's something else you can do with ngifs. Basically, use a semicolon and then you do else and then login button or whatever you want to name this. And basically, when you name it the same as when you set this here, which is like a Angular ID, you want to use something called ng template, which basically is a template is used to basically only output something, but you won't actually see anything else from it. It only outputs whatever's in it. And basically, we have to set it to that, and this will only be displayed if user status is false. If user status is true, meaning user status, then basically it'll only display this button of logout instead of login, meaning they're already logged in. So now you can show them the logout button. And then if they're not logged in, you show them the login button here. So that's basically what this does. And then you can see we have two methods, and these are events. So this is event binding, function binding here. Just like with property binding with square brackets, the event binding you use the parentheses and then like click, submit. There's different events, obviously, just like regular events. And basically pass in the method you want and then parentheses as well. And so inside of here, we want to basically, outside of the ng on changes lifecycle method, we want to basically do log out. And inside of there, we just want to set the app user ID to empty. So if they hit the logout button, this will basically set everything, clear everything out pretty much. Then we want to do logout status, which I don't think I made yet. Oh yeah, that's the emitter, so I'll get to that in a second. And so we want to do brought in earlier, and I want to use that to navigate. And I just want to do it similar to what I did on the other component. And this time I just want to navigate to slash dashboard. And I also want to append the app user ID and then the token, because that's the order in which we put it in inside of the routing module here. We did the ID first and then the token, so you want to do the same order. And that's it for that. And that basically just navigates to that page. So now you also have ng Ondestroy if you wanted to do something before like the method is before the component is destroyed. I forgot to mention that. So here we want to actually emit the logout status because we're doing it from the Navbar, so we want to emit it back to the component, such as the home component, which is basically everything that of auth and then Navbar and then the post grid. Or if we wanted the about component, which also has the Navbar, to set the variables there to false, which is basically these variables here. And in order to do that, we have to catch it. And inside of the about component, you saw that there is something called logout status, and that's basically almost like an event binding as well, because we're passing an event, which is the data that we get from that name of logout status, which is what the output variable is. And then we just have a method inside of this component that we actually catch it with and actually do something with it. And here that'll be the same thing. This won't be the same thing, but this is where we actually output it from. So up here, I actually want to bring in something called output, same as input. It'll be output like that, and you can see it auto imports it from Angular core. We want to put our parentheses as well. And then here's actually something I really want to explain. So we basically bring in something called an event emitter, but what I want to explain is something very important, because I spent literally an entire day trying to figure out what the problem was. And so basically, let me just set this variable first. So I'll call it logout status, and it'll be of type event emitter, like this. And then you have to put in carets symbols the type, and you can do like string, number, object, um, any. And so I'm gonna use any. And then basically I want to set it to a new event emitter by default, like that. We want to instantiate it. And so basically, you see how see how when I auto imported it, it brought it in from Protractor. There's also a couple other modules. This right here will literally cause you to be looking for error. If you don't pay attention to this, you'll basically be looking for error for a long time. Because I was getting like a ton of errors with things like the Selenium Webdriver. Selenium is a language, a programming language, and like the WebDriver module inside of the node modules folder, and I had to do a lot of research. I even installed Webpack, downgraded to a previous version, had to install back to the current version, had to make sure the Angular CLI was up to date, all that just to find out that it was imported from the wrong place. And so this doesn't, you don't want this to be imported from here. You want it from the Angular core. So basically, usually sometimes it does that when it auto imports, and so you want to be very careful because you'll spend a lot of time trying to figure out something that's wrong. So you want to bring it in from here. You see the error goes away now. And so basically, let me see what else I want to do here. So down here, I just want to set, I want to emit it. And so how to do that, you basically want to do logout status like that. And then dot emit because it's an event emitter. We set it to type event emitter, so we can get the methods of type of emit, and then we can pass in anything we want, or you can leave it empty if you want to. I want to pass in a value of true. Now this value that we passed in here, it has to be basically like it has to be caught, and so basically we catch it. So for instance, we caught it here, and because we called it logout status here, it has to be the same name as that. So we caught that variable that we emitted, and then we run it through check status, and then we have to pass in $event in order to actually get the data from this method. If you just .emit and you actually just want to just do a void function that doesn't take in, or just a function that doesn't take in, because it doesn't have to be void, but a function that doesn't take in the actual data because you're just emitting like basically, and this was like blank for instance, you can do that, but because we want to catch that value, you want to pass in $event. And so you can see back in here when we check the status, we can name it whatever we want, and then if it's equal to whatever. And so now you see basically like what that is, and that's what we're basically doing there. And so we're done with this component now, and basically we can just pass that in wherever we want. I already passed it in the about component. I explained everything here, I think. So basically, once again, this entire thing is in one single tag, which it has to be for it to work. This is the container for the links with a class of flex for both the entire component so that all of these are on the same line, and then for this so that all the links are on the same line inside of the container. And then each link we have to bind it, and we set square brackets for both because we can pass in an array of things. And we want to set the square brackets to bind it to the router link if we pass in any values here. You can even bind it without any values there. And it'll still work normally. I prefer to do it this way for every time I use router link, so I don't forget to do it. And so basically that's it for this ngIf directive, showing how to use else, and then rendering something else if you want to, using the same name there. And basically, the more you do it, the more it'll become natural, and you'll do it without thinking. But the key is to create a project after watching this, to implement what you know. And I'm telling you, like the moment you do it a couple times, and even like if it seems weird, you should talk to yourself a little bit while doing it, just to teach yourself. Or you can make videos to teach, even if you don't upload them, like just to teach yourself how to do it. And I'm telling you, it really will help you a lot. And so basically that'll be it for this video. That was all the components that just output stuff. now we're going to get into the components that actually we have